This is Cantus Firmus, Kingdom Theology for Christians without a country. Greetings, you're listening to Cantus Firmus. I'm Cody Cook. One idea I've been flirting with a little bit is this idea of separation. So Christians are told to be holy, which means separate throughout the Bible. They're also told to come out of Babylon, which is a code name for the world system of empire and idolatry in the book of Revelation, and actually kind of throughout the Bible, but especially there. Also, there's this other philosophy called Agorism, which is rooted in separation as well. It's an idea that's related to anarchism, wherein people pull out of, as much as possible, the economic system and engage in voluntary trade with each other. Sometimes the goal is to starve the system, but at minimal, it's a way of sort of separating, at minimum. It's no surprise then that many Christians and many agorists also support homeschooling, which is a method of teaching children apart from an educational system that prepares kids to participate in society as the state wants it to be. So while these ideas rooted in separation, I think can be very attractive for anybody who's not really satisfied with the way things are, there are some downsides that can come with them. So Christians are called to be shining lights on a hill, to be sure, but we're also told to love our neighbors and live in the world even as we try to be distinct from it and its patterns. Rod Dreher comes to mind. He's a Christian writer who's argued in his book, The Benedict Option, that it's time for Christians to separate from the culture and wait until it implodes on itself, and then we can emerge and kind of put the pieces back together. So that title, The Benedict Option, comes from the Benedictine monks who helped preserve remnants of civilization during the Dark Ages. Monks certainly do live separate lives, but are they a shining light on a hill that attracts their neighbors to Christ? Or are they largely seen as weirdos who live exotic lives? Agorism, separating from the economic system to create more local relationships and self-sustaining models of living, that sounds pretty good, but it can also be very limiting. It's hard to kind of live and function and move in society if you follow that to its logical conclusion. And we've also, I think, all heard of examples of homeschooling that failed to teach the kids the basics, and that has sometimes even been used to hide abuse. So disengagement from bad cultural and political systems seems like a no-brainer for many adults, but it can also lead to cultic attitudes that don't always serve the children who grow up in them or prepare them to live in the world. Sometimes these kids grow up and want nothing to do with how their parents raised them, so it's also counterproductive. So that's why I wanted to have a chat with Hannah. Sometimes I'll have, professors of like theology or whatever on, and we'll talk about these sort of high-level concepts from an academic perspective. But what really interested me about Hannah is that she's doing this stuff on the ground level. She's a Christian. She's an agorist. She also homeschools her children. So, Hannah, I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And so maybe we can start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and then why these issues sort of started to become important for you.
I don't really know what to say about myself, to be honest. There's kind of a lot and nothing to say at the same time. I mean, you pretty much covered it, agorist, homeschooler, and non-denominational Christian. Yes. Honestly, these have always been very important to me. I was off and on homeschooled growing up, and I finally, in the middle of my second year of high school, I was at the point where I was begging to be homeschooled again because I just couldn't handle public school anymore with all the horror stories I was dealing with on a regular basis. I just could not take it. And at that point, I swore to myself I was never going to public school my children. Whichever future children I'd have, they were going to be homeschooled. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I've been homeschooling my kids since day one, not since COVID and, now we all have to homeschool. No, I've been doing it well before that. And I don't have any intention to stop. It's working out very well for my children. And yeah, I know, there's definitely a lot of concerns. Like you said, people say, oh, well, they can hide abuse through it, or maybe they're not getting the proper education, etc. And that is, it happens, but that is just so far in between. Most homeschooled kids come out not just fine, but better off in the long run than your average public school child. They're more successful. They're more just put together overall. They're happier. They thrive better. Statistically, homeschool children do better for a multitude of reasons.
I was just jotting down a note as you were talking, because sometimes when people talk about public schooling or whatever, I've often like sort of thought of it as like this prolonged hazing ritual, but people will say, oh, well, that's important, that they need that, right? They need that sort of bullying or whatever that builds character.
God.
And so it seems like it's interesting that those same people will sort of then talk about concerns for abuse in a homeschooling environment. I've also, I went to public school all through my schooling, and and I also meet people all the time who went through public school who can barely spell, and it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this argument about how good how important public schooling is really holds much water, right?
Well, it's hysterical to me because parents of both sides of the political spectrum, so to speak, they all have their complaints about general society. The right wing will say, oh, everybody is an idiot, everybody is lazy and a degenerate, and they're taking over the public schools, and we got to take it back. We got to take over the public school system. And then on the left side, they also complain. I mean, look at what we're dealing with now because of Roe versus Wade. They're like, oh my God, nobody has grown up. Everyone's terrible. We're still 50 years back. And both sides complain about bullying epidemics, and then you get the right side complaining about groomers in the public schools. Everybody has different complaints, and they're all valid complaints. Honestly, like they all hold water here. But then these are the same people that are calling, oh my God, everybody's an idiot, everybody's a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. Well, most of these people were public schooled. So clearly if you consider everybody to be a complete ignoramus, but they were all public schooled, what do you think the problem? What's the common denominator here? And then they stick their kids in public schools and, oh, we're just going to take it back. We're just going to make it better. And then their kids grow up to be freaking, disappointments in their eyes. And it's like, maybe you weren't going to be the exception here. Just like every other parent who thought their kid would be the exception by still sticking them in a system that they see was failing. It makes no freaking sense.
Yeah. And, it seems to me, you talk about all these complaints that everybody has. The system as it is requires homogeneity, right? Everyone gets the same system, the same education, the same solutions.
Yes.
And what that means is that basically nobody's happy because
that's yes, exactly.
Yeah. When everything is so centralized, there's no such thing. It basically becomes a one size fits all. And no one's really going to be satisfied with that. And I think too, that along with the fact that there's this kind of government force behind it to back it up, I think does create, when we talk about polarization a lot, part of it is that we're living in different communities and different environments, and mass media tries to kind of make this kind of one sort of digital Babylon where we all live together. But we're finding, that we're different, right? So people who are in Oklahoma and in the middle of the woods or whatever are shocked to find out that there's drag queen story hours in New York City, and it just completely distresses them. And even though it's not anything they could control, it's not in their backyard. So like on the one hand, yeah, there's this sense that we're living these sort of separate lives. The internet kind of can sometimes ghettoize it because we find our own little communities, but we're also aware of all these different perspectives and different opinions. And we're not really talking to each other. We're talking past each other. So there's that. But I think that the other big thing that makes it really hard, I think, to get along is because every issue becomes an issue of political survival in our mind. Right. But it seems to me that when we introduce force into every topic, every subject, this is how we're going to do school, this is how we're going to do this is how we're going to do that, it becomes a fight for survival, at least in the minds of people who are struggling with these issues.
No, absolutely. And no one is really prepared to survive. And quite frankly, that is also because of it's public school as well. It's not going to teach you the skills you need to survive. You're being taught how to pass tests, and that's it. You're not being taught how to think for yourself. You're not being taught to prepare for worst case situations. You're not even taught to really properly debate and come up with arguments that are going to get across the other person when you do have a complaint. Some schools have debate classes or whatever, but those are, in my experience, and I've been through 4 different high schools, only one of my schools actually offered like a debate class, and nobody was signing up for that because they're like, no, that's boring. Why would I want to do that?
What nerds do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so nobody gave a about it, and nobody knows how to function. Nobody knows how to function in the slightest. And I feel like that's a big part of why people like, you, me, etc., there's just more drive to pull away, because we don't want our kids being surrounded by that. And I say we just as, as a whole, in the libertarian circle or whatever it may be. And I really believe more Christians need to feel this way too, because again, it makes no sense to acknowledge that there is a system that is so corrupt and so evil and so twisted, and then stick your kids in the middle of it going, oh, but mine's going to be fine. Mine's going to be fine. How do you sit there and say college is turning kids communist? High schools are now turning kids communist. Now elementary schools are turning kids communist. Well, if they're turning kids communist, or they're turning them away from God, as you say, that means these kids were originally Christian Republicans like your own. So what makes you think yours is going to be the exception if you stick them in this? That's honestly, that's extremely narcissistic in a way, because it's like, no, you're just throwing your kid in the wolves going, oh, he's going to be fine. And then they're not fine. And then what? What are you going to do now?
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because I was sort of talking, when in the introduction, I talked about kind of agorism and Christianity and homeschooling as these kind of philosophies of separation. But I think that, sometimes people use homeschooling to keep kids in the community. But a lot of the arguments that I hear for homeschooling are about maintaining individuality, that I want my kid to not sort of have their love of learning beat out of them. I want them to be able to pursue their interests and sort of figure out what they're good at and what they're interested in. And that feels very individualistic in some ways, right?
No, that's exactly, yeah.
And agorism, though, is often more communal, right? It's about finding that community and engaging voluntarily. And I think Christianity is a very communal kind of religion, or at least it ought to be. I know some people don't approach it that way. So that seems like a difference on one side, on one level. But it seems to me that part of what all three of them are trying to push back against is malformed community, right? That we have a community that we call the United States of America that is based on coercion and political violence and threat. And we're saying, hey, we want to separate from that. Or, we have this communities called schools that are kind of filled with, bullying and often, can be some kinds of indoctrination that happens. And this kind of destruction of sometimes individual interests, and you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. And so that what I think all of these philosophies of separation are trying to do is trying to push back against a malformed kind of community.
In regards to the individuality versus community sense, I mean, you are completely correct. That is one of the main, I mean, personally, that's one of the main reasons why I homeschool my kids, is because I don't see my kids just as kids. I see them as individuals, and they are, even from each other, they are just completely opposite children in so many ways. And I celebrate that. I love watching their unique personalities and what just grow and blossom. I love seeing what they want to do, what they want to be. And I want to encourage that, because they are unique individuals. And the way I see it, that is how God created them. And in order to have a functioning quote unquote commune, because in agorism, I mean, my personal beliefs, it's not like communism. It's more like, yeah, you really should make some connections and just have some local buddies where you can trade and barter kind of thing. But that's just it. You're balancing each other out. You have skills that you can provide another person. They have skills that you don't have that they can provide for you. And so I feel like being an individual and embracing your unique skills and talents, etc., are actually very key to a functioning communal society of any kind, agorism or whatever, because we're all going to have our strengths and weaknesses. We need to balance each other out. If we're all just exactly the same, we can't do it all. Nothing is going to really thrive and fully function properly if everybody has the same mentality, everybody has the same skill sets, everybody has the same drives. It's just going to fall apart. So yeah, honestly, I don't see that as anything that clashes. I just see that as more reason why the three, homeschooling, agorism, and Christianity, that's just how they work together even more.
Sure. Well, I like the way you described agorism. Everybody kind of contributes their own strengths because, or contributes their own, abilities, because it does feel, it sort of feels like a microcosm of free market capitalism, or what it's supposed to be. And free market capitalism is often associated with individualism. But it really, if there's no one to trade with, then you can't really have free market capitalism, right?
Right.
And so that trade aspect is very communal. It's saying, here's something that I've developed, here's something I'm good at, there's something over here that you've developed that you're good at, and let's share and let's trade. And then everybody becomes sort of richer through that process. So I do like that, the way of thinking, because the way you said it made me just think about how capitalism can be actually much more communal than we like to think that it is. Okay, so have you read Brian Kaplan's book, The Case Against Education?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I just finished it, and it was kind of really fascinating because he puts together all of this data on the benefits of finishing high school and college and so on and so forth. And what he points out is that most of what we learn in school we forget, so we don't use it ever again. And it's not necessarily what we learn that makes us hireable in most cases. Sometimes obviously they're not going to hire you as a doctor if you haven't, if you haven't been in medical school, or as a lawyer if you haven't passed the bar or whatever. But in a lot of cases, what you're actually demonstrating is what he calls, basically he's saying it's signaling, that you're signaling to employers, not that you know something that's going to be useful, but that you have character traits. These character traits are intelligence, conscientious, and conformity. So you're smart enough to succeed, you're conscientious enough to complete the tasks, but you're also not so much of an individual that you're not going to obey orders, right? Or that so basically, that conformity aspect, that you're going to do what the teachers tell you to do and you're going to complete it. And what he points out is you can actually see like how, let's say you were in college for four years and you had one class to complete and you didn't complete it, so you didn't get your degree. That one last class to complete it is actually what gets you the benefits in the job market. And so even if it were like, let's say you're in school for to be an engineer and you didn't take that last class on Asian poetry or something, it's going to be hard for you to get a job as an engineer. And what he's sort of really arguing is that we think of school as preparing kids for something, but what he's really saying is that it's really a way to demonstrate that you have certain traits that make you a good cog in a wheel in a corporation, basically.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was a really fascinating argument, and I think pretty defensible as well.
Yeah, I mean, public school, there is no true desire to work with kids on the individual and embrace who they are. They don't want us to be, I mean, obviously, because it's not even just to the point where they're simply educating children. They're not just like, okay, 2 + 2 is 4, and all the basics. They're not just keeping it that. They're now putting political agenda and propaganda strictly into it, which I remember growing up. I all my schooling was done in California, and teachers definitely try to tiptoe around that. My mom especially would complain because we'd tell her, oh yeah, they're pushing propaganda again. We kind of ratted the teachers out on a regular basis, my brothers and I. And now it's not simply educating and let the children come up with their own opinions, let them be their own individuals. It's no, you're going to think this. You're going to have these opinions just like I do. You are going to be one and the same. There is no desire to create individuals. It is strictly, you're going to be a cog in the system.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Southwest Ohio, which was so my public schooling was more conservative for sure. And I know that all this stuff happens. They talk about indoctrination on a political level. I tend to think that it's probably exaggerated, but I also know that it happens. But I think for me, and I know that's a reason why somebody might take their kids out of school, is because they're concerned about certain political indoctrination. But I think in a lot of ways, as a Marshall McLuhan said, that the medium is the message, that what schooling teaches is what it is. It's not necessarily that, well, they're teaching all these things that we don't like. it's really that schooling in and of itself is an approach to thinking and living and being in the world, and that's what's being taught. It's that you are supposed to conform, you're supposed to sort of, you know, go along and you know, obey. And so I think, to me, that's what's most distressing. You can put window dressing around that that's progressive. You can put window dressing around that that's conservative. But in the end, it's schooling itself is what's being taught. It's not what schooling teaches. It's what schooling is that I think can be the problem.
You know, you're completely right. They are basically just teaching you how to listen, how to conform, how to follow a schedule, how to respond to, oh, the bell rings, it's time for this. It's dog-like training, honestly, because that's how society is seen. I mean, we're not supposed to question. We are not supposed to stand up and be like, no, this is wrong, and we need to do things our own way. We are taught, no, the world is black and white, and you can only choose black and white. You're either this person or you're that person, and that is it. Anyone out of the norm is demonized. They're the weird kids. They're the antisocial kids. And maybe they are very social, but they're just different. So they have a hard time making friends simply because they have different interests, but they're labeled as the problem. It's not, oh, this kid is just a different person with their own unique interests and likes. And so they're having a hard time finding somebody that shares unique interests. Just, oh no, they're weird. They're antisocial. They're not normal. And we need to make them normal. I mean, I actually remember an instant I had when I was in junior high, very similar. I was that child. I had excellent grades. I was very well behaved, and I did have a rough home life, but I was just kind of my own person. I didn't know how to be anyone but my own person. And I had no desire to be anybody but my own person. And so at that point, I was kind of already on the edge of libertarianism pretty hard. And I didn't grow up with a lot of the same things that the modern kids did. I listened to a lot of older music. I didn't watch modern shows. I mean, so I kind of had very different interests from everyone else. And I got picked on for it a lot. I literally had like a group of kids that would just follow me everywhere, just calling me names, pushing me around, just, you know, harassing me. And I wasn't allowed to fight back, but I just had enough. And so I went to my principal about it. And I'm like, this is a regular occurrence, and they just won't leave me alone. I'm literally just trying to sit here and read my book, and they can't even let me do that. And his response to me was, you need to learn how to be more like them.
Okay.
You need to start dressing more like them. You need to act more like them. You need to start listening to more music like they do, and they'll leave you alone. It wasn't, hey, let's stop the bullying that's literally going on a daily basis. It was just be more like them. I don't care that you're an individual. You're the problem, and you need to change. That was the message he said to me. And that was 20 years ago. You know, this is not a recent thing. This has been going on. I mean,
that was in California too?
Yes. It was in California.
Yeah, I can see that in Ohio. It seems a little strange to say in California.
Oh, no. California schools are absolutely horrible. I mean, again, I went through 4 different high schools alone. Yeah. And every single school had issues, like bad. Mm-hmm. And I mean, people ask me like, oh, how are you already radicalized against public school? Because y'all radicalized me. Mm-hmm. I was the top-notch student, overachiever, teacher's pet. I was skipping my lunch breaks to clean up trash around the school. I was tutoring deaf kids after school. I didn't know sign language. I just figured out how to communicate with them and help their grades get higher. I mean, I was a good kid, but because I was different, I was still demonized by everybody. I wasn't hurting anybody. I just wanted to be left alone. I just wanted to sit there, read my books, and be left alone. That's all I wanted. But that was just too much to ask, because I dressed different, because I looked different, because I didn't like the same music as everyone else. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. We kind of talked about how schools teach conformity, but yeah, for some kids like you, and I guess like me, you know, growing up in that system kind of radicalized us against it in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Anyway. This is off topic. You mentioned watching old shows. Were you a Nick at Night kid like I was?
Oh, I didn't even have cable until I was 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mind. I was watching like National Geographic and Nova and crap like that. I was watching documentaries.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Those were cool too. But yeah, I watched a lot of Nick at Night. I had when I was, I think, 9 years old, I had a a book. It was a Nick at Night's classic TV companion, and it had like episode guides for all these like old like shows from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Anyway, that was like my Bible. So okay. Well, so I mean, we've kind of critiqued the system as it is. How can we function in the world as it is, to be different, to kind of go our own path, but to still be able to function in the world as it is? And then I think maybe a second question, and maybe we could address this separately, is how do you be different without sort of increasing polarization? Like how is it that we can sort of live our own lives, choose to do things the way we want to do them, without necessarily hating people that disagree with us, or sort of dehumanizing them, or decontextualizing them and what they're saying?
Just be yourself and stop caring what other people think about what you do.
That's good.
Honestly, I mean, I get that a lot. I will get people who message me and they're like, hey, I want to homeschool my kids. I want to do this. I want to do that because I'm completely on your side here. I believe this just like you do, but I'm afraid to do it because what if my grandparents, make some comments? What if my fiance doesn't like it? What if, and I'm like, these are your kids. Are you going to sit here and tell me you'd rather have your kids go into this public school system that you are morally against because you're afraid of getting some eye rolls on Thanksgiving? Mm-hmm. Like, what's more important? People need to stop caring in that regard. Care about who you are as an individual. Care about how your kids are being raised. Like, I'm not saying don't care entirely. Oh, just screw you guys. I do what I want. Like, no, because kind of going back to what you said earlier, how do we look like a beacon of light upon the mountain kind of thing? And or are we just going to be looked at as the weirdos? How we live our lives as the quote unquote outcasts, weirdos, whatever it may be, how we ultimately look to other people does absolutely speak worlds to those who are watching us. If we are just living life of, well, I don't care. I'm going to keep making bad decisions because screw you guys. I do what I want. Anarchy, yay. That's only going to turn people away from us. We're going to look like the degenerates. And quite frankly, that's only going to end up in more regulations and more restrictions on us. It's going to be more difficult for us to pull away and live our peaceful lives if we set these bad images on other people. So yes, care, but also don't care as long as you know you are not hurting anybody. Live a life of righteousness. Yeah. Protect your kids, be happy, be healthy, just be the best person you can be. And then what do they have to really complain about? They can sit there and all they want, but if there's no actual problems, well, all they're doing is boo-hoo, you're different, and they're just being a bully. Just tune them the fuck out. Honestly.
Yeah. Well, so as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking, you can care about making the right choice. You should care about making the right choice. You should care about people. If they have good advice, you should want to listen to it. But you don't necessarily have to care about approval, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're not here for anybody's approval. I'm not here for your approval, and nobody's here for my approval. That's not what life's about. I mean, especially as a Christian, we are flat out taught that if we are living life as holy as possible, no one is going to approve of us because the rest of the world is unholy and they're, screwed up, they're degenerates, whatever it may be. They're not going to like us. So just be prepared for that. I mean, God, that was pushed on me heavily as a kid. And I think that's kind of part of why I am how I am now. Mm-hmm. I always knew I was not going to have people approving the way I lived, no matter how good I was. And that still holds true. And I just don't care because as Christians are taught to believe, we're only going for God's approval, not Satan's world's approval. Mm-hmm. Like that's literally if you're going for the rest of the world's approval, you're literally doing the opposite of what we are called to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I got maybe one last substantial question, which is, how do you practice agorism? This idea of sort of, voluntary interactions and transactions that are sort of separated. So I assume you're not completely apart from the sort of financial system that we've got, right? So how do you sort of try to practice agorism in your kind of day to day?
I do what I can. Homeschooling is absolutely a big part of it because I don't want my kids to be involved in the government indoctrination. I want them to be good. I just want them to thrive and be happy and healthy in adulthood. I want them to function. I don't have this need to see them be celebrities. I just want them to be happy and wholesome, good adults. And I don't feel like they are going to reach their full potentials if they are in public schools. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know they're not. I do homestead where I can. I run my own, handmade business, making my own money. I'm my own boss. I just kind of do what I want as long as it's not bad. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything illegal. Like, I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm literally just trying to be left alone and function and take care of my kids. That's really all there is to it. Just do your thing and don't give a damn what other people think as long as you're not hurting them.
Well, I want to thank you again, Hannah, for taking time to be here to talk with me. It's I appreciate what you're trying to do. It's a lot of what I'm trying to do as well. So I just appreciate you making time. I know you stay busy, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Letting him lead that sober breeze, riding his hotel